her job? Like, how does she see her role right now?
Right. This was a historic appointment. This is the first female chief of staff appointed in the White House in history. And so there's history on that part. But Susie Wiles has long led Trump's campaign for the past 2 years, but she's done it from behind the scenes. I've spoken with many sources who were a part of the Trump campaign who said unanimously they believe that it was going to be Susie Wiles who ultimately got the chief of staff role. And they credit that to the amount of discipline and focus she had during the campaign. Many people on Republican and Democrat side have said that Trump's 2024 campaign was more focused and more disciplined than it was in 2020 and also in 2016. And so the hopes of many from inside Trump's world is that Susie Wiles will continue to bring that level of discipline she brought to the campaign to the White House.
Tell me a little bit more about what you're seeing on the ground, right? We know that right now Team Trump is vetting different cabinet member candidates. Do we know, Jake, who the top contenders may be based on what you're seeing, based on who's stopping by Mar-a-Lago? I'm especially thinking about, for instance, who will take the crucial attorney general spot. What do you know?
That's right. Over the past few days, it's pretty rare that we don't actually hear and see a lot of now President-elect Donald Trump. Part of that is because he has been holed up in Mar-a-Lago behind me. The past few days focused on two things. One has been meetings with world leaders. Secondly, he has been narrowing down his list of potential cabinet members to select who he's going to lead alongside in this upcoming administration. To give you a quick glimpse back to the 2016 administration for a second, Donald Trump saw over 20 different transitions in his cabinet. There was a ton of turnover, an unprecedented amount that we hadn't seen in decades. This time around, Trump and Trump's campaign, his transition team, are solely focused on ensuring they get Trump loyalists into the White House, people that will stick with him through the entirety of his campaign. As you mentioned, that specific attorney general role is one that's highly coveted and important going forward. NBC's reported a few different folks that they could see in that role, including Matt Whitaker, Mark Pauletta, and Senator Eric Schmidt are three that NBC has confirmed are at least in talks or in consideration for that upcoming AG role.
Great. Thank you so much, Jake. NBC's Jake Traylor. Thanks for everything. Now, the resistance to a new Trump presidency is already underway as we speak. A women's march held today in Washington, D.C., set to culminate in a dance party in front of the right-wing Heritage Foundation. Now, while it provides shades of the massive women's protests held the day after Trump's inauguration in D.C. and at key locations across the globe, it's far short of the demonstrations we saw in 18 cities across the U.S. just days after Election Day in 2016, with the largest events taking place right here in New York City and in L.A., of course. In 2016, the New York Times expressed the shock of the moment in its post-election editorial, the headline screaming, "Donald Trump is elected president in stunning repudiation of the establishment." But on Wednesday, this week, the New York Times editorial board had a more resigned tone, a more somber tone, simply warning, America makes a perilous choice. And it's impossible to ignore another key difference this time around. At the start of his first term, Trump surrounded himself with well-known members of the establishment, setting up a sort of self-imposed guardrails, if you will. This time, we're expecting a very different group of people surrounding Donald Trump, and guardrails definitely don't seem to be in their vocabulary. But those who stood against Trump the first time around are once again ready for what lies ahead. Joining us now.
I think one of the things that Trump team did the first time around is try and enact so many policies that it would overwhelm us. I suspect we're going to see that again. So what we'll have to do is pick the most egregious policies and go after them, but we'll have to be coordinated with city and state governments, with other NGOs, and with people in civil society to really have an organized effort.
All right, so joining us now are MSNBC political analyst Julian Castro, a former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Republican strategist, and MSNBC political analyst Susan Del Precio, Latasha Brown, co-founder of Black Voters Matter Fund, and Grecia Lima, National Political Director with Community Change. Thank you all so much. Grecia, I'm going to start with you. I think there's a lot of people within the Democratic Party that are trying to understand perhaps what went wrong and what can be done that's better. What advice would you give the Democratic Party about what they can learn from organizers on the ground, like yourself?
Thank you, Paula. Well, here's my sober truth about what happened on Tuesday. Well, I'm so proud of the work that we have done, and we did so much work. 2.5 million conversations with hard to reach, hard to find voters. Voters that are usually avoided and sometimes forgotten by traditional campaigns. We know that organizing works. And there's so much noise about what happened, but I feel really certain about that truth. And the data proves to me that organizing continues to work. Every single one of those voters that we had a direct conversation with actually made a plan and overperformed statewide early vote turnout. That is a certainty that should not be avoided. And two, the other thing that I know is that the infrastructure that we need to actually defeat MAGA is not here yet. And I am sober about that. I know that it will require for us to continue to have conversations with people that are frustrated with the current political system, that feel forgotten because of the economic hardships that they're experiencing, but that this is not the time to retreat. This is the time for offense.
Latasha, Grecia talks about the infrastructure, right? The infrastructure that will be needed to sort of keep fighting. I'm thinking about abortion bans, voting rights, mass deportations, LGBTQ rights. What we do know, Latasha, is that Trump's second administration will operate with fewer guardrails, right? So I guess my question to you is, how do you prepare for what's to come?
I think in the same way that was just said is we have to organize. But we have to organize. We just can't organize out of fear. We've got to organize on promise and possibilities. Like at the end of the day, what often happens is that we'll see this election, we'll see it because we didn't get the outcome as a failure. No, it wasn't a failure. It was one step closer to us really becoming the America that we desire, we deserve. What that means is that we've got to engage more people. The growth opportunity is really on the Democratic side, but we can no longer continue to do this work and not embrace and talk about poor people, not talk about the millions of folks we don't even consider in this process. And I think that's what we've got to do. We've got to organize, plant a vision of a North Star, and literally move towards that and stop centering Trump in all of our conversations as he is the biggest boogeyman that cannot be defeated. The people can defeat him.
Mm-hmm. Secretary Castro, thinking about what Latasha said, I think also at the same time, there are some activists on the ground, at least some folks that I talk to in places like Arizona, that are feeling that perhaps the Harris campaign lacked imagination and perhaps that they lacked the sort of political courage to mobilize some progressives. Now, that is up for debate, of course. But I guess my question to you, Secretary, is the way forward as a party to take a more center-right approach, or should it be a more center-left approach? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I know there's going to be a lot of analysis, right, in the weeks and the months to come. And so I think that the answer is probably going to end up being that there are improvements that can be made in different ways. I think that Kamala Harris was dealt a bad hand from the beginning. I think Joe Biden should have dropped out, announced that he wasn't going to run after the midterms, and that she would have been in better stead going that way, having more time to really introduce herself to the American people, not just do it with 100 days left. But I would say yes to more organizing, yes to not just focusing on the crossover vote, the Liz Cheneys and so forth, but also, for instance, not being afraid to say that mass deportation is wrong. In the last month or so of the campaign, when they were pouring it on and blaming migrants for everything and openly calling for mass deportation, you didn't see, the candidate or maybe the vice presidential candidate did it once, but say, look, that would be wrong. That's not who we are, like full-throatedly. Something happened there. And so I think that we both have to organize better. We have to reach out on the economic issues, but then not forget about our values and lead with our values and be bold in that way. And I think that we can do both of those things. I don't think that it's an either or. Mm-hmm.
Susan, I'm thinking about this idea that this new Trump White House will be actually very different from what we've seen in the past. I'm thinking about people like RFK Jr. being in power, people like Elon Musk. And so I'm wondering what you think about the new type of threat that those folks could pose if they get these positions of power.
Yeah, before I get to that, I just want to go to one thing about what happened in this past election. And I agree, there'll be a ton of reviews of what happened and what didn't happen. But at least from the punditry class, and I think we missed a huge thing. We kept saying, how can you vote for Trump? to some of these voters, especially the working class. How could you support him? Instead of saying, why do you support him? Knowing everything you know about him. These were not people who voted for Trump in that working class coalition were not unaware of Donald Trump's what he had said. In fact, he was more like the school bully who had a lifeboat, and you knew he was going to pull you in and save you, but he'd still punch you in the mouth, but it was worth being saved. So I think that is something that we really have to look at very carefully before we figure out how to defeat a MAGA, if you will, environment.
Totally.
What concerns me the most about this White House is not so much the names that we saw on the screen before that were being discussed with the reporter. It's the other people, maybe 3 or 4 levels down, that may have some influence over things that Trump does not care about. They may have vendettas, and Trump is a transactional guy. If you supported him and you decide that the DOJ office in Indiana isn't working the right way and you don't like the person there, he doesn't care. He'll say fine. Or fluoride in the water. We shouldn't have that. Fine. RFK Jr. may not be in charge of all our health services, but he can influence things like that. So that is my biggest concern as far as what to look going forward. And can government operate under these types of folks?
So Grecia, let's actually take some of Susan's advice and let's ask the following. Why, to Susan's point, why do you think that we saw a bigger number of Latinos voting for Donald Trump this time around? Based on what you're seeing on the ground, why did we see this?
Yeah. Well, here's what I know. A friend of mine actually said, grief is better to digest when you have no regrets. And I can tell you from the hundreds and thousands of volunteers, state partners, voters that we talk to, they have no regrets about the effort and spirit that they put to win these elections and to specifically ask that question. Why are you uncertain about your vote? Why do you believe that your vote is not powerful? And what we found was a lot of people very disillusioned and a lot of people experiencing real economic pain points. But to your question around what can we do, what should we expect, and how do we change that conversation, it's a full paradigm shift that it's required. And we have to do better at showing, not just telling, that our economic models work. We have models, and we actually will need Democratic governors, city council elected officials, county officials, legislatures to show, not tell, that our economic progress and the progress of a better future for Latino families, but all families here in America, that it's possible if we invest in childcare, if we invest in programs like guaranteed income, or if we put forward progressive tax brackets, and we just have not been able to really show, not tell voters that they can trust us. And one last thing that I want to say is the people that were uncertain and were uncertain with us at the doors, they trusted not just necessarily the candidate, but they trusted us as civil society organizations to be there after Election Day. And that's what we're going to do. Be there after Election Day and continue to build the resistance that we know it will be required, not just on the offense, not just on the defense, but actually on the offense for what a prosperous economic future looks like.
And quickly, Latasha, just to you've been there, to Grecia's point, you have been there on the ground.